Saudi Arabia.
Good morning, everyone. I think there is always that risk in every country in the world. We've seen it again and again in industrial and post-industrial societies. So we should not think that we can escape that probability that has been seen all over. And therefore, it is, to me, there is a need that we remind ourselves that, okay, we have done well, but we have a lot to do further, and we should not allow ourselves to slide back. That's the warning.
Because at the beginning you started using the word challenges,
Yes.
and then by the end you were talking about significant challenges,
Yes.
the need to be agile and moving with the speed of change.
Exactly, and as I mentioned, for example, when we talk about labor market flexibility, and the Minister of Labor is here, that is a very important challenge. And for you to be productive, to be competitive, and to be able to diversify your economy, you need that flexibility in your labor market, in your product market, in your competition policies. All of these are not easy to do. And therefore, one, we have to keep reminding ourselves and not allow ourselves to be complacent.
Right. Well, look, let's move forward with our other ideas to put into the pot here of understanding the real challenges of competition, of innovation, and the speed, not least the challenges being created by so many other nations, so many other regions around the world. Let's now move to Deborah Winsmith. In addition, you're president of the newly formed Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, and you helped create that. So the floor is yours for 4 minutes, please.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and first I'd like to congratulate His Excellency Governor Al Othman for this fantastic GFC around the theme of building competitiveness partnerships, and also thank the Minister for his outstanding remarks. And I'd also like to acknowledge one of my partners in the creation of the new Global Federation of Competitiveness Councils, and that's His Royal Highness Prince Al Saud Al Faisal, who's Deputy Governor of Sagia and serves on our board and is very much in a leadership role with us in bringing together this new network of both thought leaders and action leaders to really focus on the challenges and opportunities of competitiveness. You know, we're in a time of great, extraordinary change. We're really in the midst of two transitions between the 20th century production manufacturing model to a 21st century conceptual economy. And so it is a time of turbulence and transformation. And everything's happening at warp speed. Right now we are living in the greatest scientific and technological revolutions that man has ever witnessed. I like to say that the digital, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and now the cognitive technology revolutions are rewriting the codes of life and how everything will be produced and made and delivered for value creation. And of course, this is going to have profound implications on productivity and prosperity in nations and regions and global growth. But it's a time of great opportunity. You know, this Internet of Things is already here. We're seeing it in how we're going to collaborate and work together today. Big data, data analytics. We're actually drowning in data. What do we do with this data? How do we create value? So it's a tremendous time of change and opportunity. The other trend that's very important is the merger now of 21st century energy and manufacturing. You know, manufacturing is no longer dirty, dumb, dangerous, and disappearing. It's smart, it's safe, it's sustainable, and it is surging. And we're seeing that with this energy transformation, particularly in the United States, where we have our shale gas revolution coupled to advanced materials and modeling and simulation and automation. Our manufacturing sector is surging, and it's directly related to energy competitiveness. At the Council on Competitiveness over almost 30 years, we have 4 pillars for technology, innovation, and competitiveness: talent, technology, infrastructure, and investment. And if you look at any of these pillars, all the issues we're talking about conform into that template. It's a complex system, and how these pillars interact is very key. Talent, I'm going to talk about just a moment in my last minute, because at the heart of the day, it's people who innovate. It's people who lead change. And we have to have a new educational system and workforce skills that can meet these opportunities of the change in science and technology and how we live our lives. I want to just share one example of a public-private partnership in the US that's bringing all of this together. And that is what we're calling a manufacturing and energy partnership, where we're looking at some of the biggest issues, next generation batteries, wideband semiconductor systems, and bringing together our young people, our leading universities, our companies, and our government to actually create the infrastructure for this change. What is really, at the end of the day, the most important thing in competitiveness? It's the people you have in your nation and how they are empowered to do what? To conceive, to create, and to add value. Women, of course, are a very important part of this equation. They always have been throughout human history. And, you know, competitiveness is a journey. It always has a beginning. It never has an end. You know, we can say this in a joking way, but it's true. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones. And so innovation is always going to be with us. So I thought I'd just close with a little bit of alliteration. We're talking about competitiveness, and we're talking about change and challenges. So what are the 5 key challenges for competitiveness? C to the 5th power. Change and churn, complexity, choice, not complacency, conceiving, creating, and at the end of the day, having a better world for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. That was tremendous, not least with your 5 points right at the end. No complacency on this. Really reflecting, I think, the Minister's view. Just before we go to Hans-Paul Birkner, can I just give you one question, Minister, already from the floor? Don't you think that KSA needs to relax its visa system to encourage businessmen access to the kingdom? That would make it more competitive. Quickly.
The short answer, absolutely, yes. I mean, there is no question about that, and I think the authorities have been very clear about that. We probably just need to get some bureaucratic hurdles out of the way, but I think there is, as far as I'm concerned, there is absolute conviction that this is very important. These are participants in our industrial development, and we need them to be here on time whenever they need to be.
And it can be done quickly, can it?
It should be.
Because this is a time, as we've heard from Deborah, of turbulence and transformation. It requires smart, instant reaction. Right, let's move on. That gives you an idea of how you can inject your ideas as you're thinking about them as you listen to the discussion. Hans-Paul Birkner, and by the way, could you just be careful if you're near a microphone? There is a mobile phone which is causing some kind of interference, if you would be good enough to just check that. Hans-Paul.
Good. Let me start off by reinforcing the message that His Excellency, the Minister for Economy and Planning, and also Deborah said. Competitiveness has to be gained and regained time and again. And I think the biggest enemy to competitiveness is complacency and a feeling of entitlement. And I'm not saying this specifically here in Saudi Arabia. I think we have this all over the world. Germany, the country I come from, and I've been living for a long time, has been very competitive. Then, you know, there was a sense of probably complacency, entitlement, and by the middle of the 90s, Germany was called the sick man of Europe. And a lot of efforts have been made by the government, but also by private companies and by individuals. And today, Germany looks somewhat better than it looked certainly in the middle of the 90s. But the key issue really is you have to work hard, and nobody can anything taken for granted, whether it's an individual, a private corporation, or government institutions. And they really have to push the boundaries continuously, which of course is quite a big task. Secondly, I think it's very important to understand, just building on what I said beforehand, is that every individual, every private corporation, every government entity understands that they have to invest in themselves and really help to push the boundaries. For individuals, that means, of course, education, training, and then really making a contribution wherever they are active. And I think it's so important right from the very beginning, when children are very small, to really get a clear sense of responsibility in the education, to make sure that every individual, whether it's a girl or a boy, they understand what they can do and should do. And children are very, very open. and of course, again, young people. And I think, again, across the Western world, but also in some emerging markets, there is this sense of entitlement, you know, when the societies are relatively rich or the efforts are less, people tend to become lazy and laid back. And I think it's very important to really create the sense of, you know, making an effort is needed, and everybody has the right and the duty to make a contribution. For corporations, it means you continuously have to look at your strategy, your organization, your operations, and try to improve them. Become more productive, become more innovative, trying out things. And it's a never-ending story. We've seen many great companies fall from grace within a few years after having built a great business model, but then not understanding that the business model has only a certain half-time, and it needs to be reinvented. A new business model has to be developed, or new business models. And thirdly, the institutions also have to change, and there has to be massive efforts in order to create a level playing field for all participants. Open markets, preventing monopolies, oligopolies. And again, it is, you know, the government institutions and the government in general has the obligation to make sure that there are open markets, open structures. The bureaucratic hurdles are being removed step by step. Now, finally, on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I think we have heard both from His Excellency, the Governor of Sagia, and His Excellency, the Minister of Economy and Planning, that enormous efforts are being made. Infrastructure investments are massive, but of course the visa process, getting through immigration, can be facilitated. There could be a lot more flights, you know, within Saudi Arabia and also to other parts of the world. But overall, there is massive investments in infrastructure. Lots of efforts are being made. Institutional efforts are also enormous. The tax regime is very favorable to investments. A lot of things happening, but probably the key is, and that was also my starting point, is the people. Do people understand, the young people understand, that they have a responsibility, a duty also to really contribute? And, or is there a sense of entitlement and that really prevents them from making the efforts? And I think here probably the biggest change has to happen for the sake of the individual, the institutions here in the kingdom, and the kingdom overall. Thank you.
Nick, do you mind if I just wanted to pick up a point that Hans mentioned, which is really relevant. He mentioned Germany, which is considered to be one of the most competitive nations now. But last week we were visited by former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, and he knew full well what that meant, because the malaise or the complacency that inflicted Germany during his time drove him to make very serious changes in the policies of Germany. They were so important, but they were so politically difficult that he lost the elections. But for the next 10 years, after he left office, they were reaping the benefits of those structural changes that he had the courage to implement. So it's a very interesting lesson that I wanted to just remind ourselves of.
And it's the same in many countries.
I think, you know, he was really punished, or the Social Democrats were really punished by the electorate for those changes. And I think it's indeed an important lesson, but you could also go back to the UK with Margaret Thatcher, to other countries who really made big efforts. And most often, governments have been voted out of office after having made those changes.
Thank you. A lot of questions already coming in, so keep them coming. And Bob, maybe we can just put the address up again. Here, for example, Abdulaziz Al-Judemi. What single piece of advice would the panelists give to KSA as the one thing that's essential for our country to increase competitiveness? Now, Hans-Paul, I can come to you and also to Deborah. Do you want to jump in at this moment before we go to the other two panelists and just say what your one word of advice is, Deborah?
My one word of advice is to take advantage of your very brilliant people and become a great leader in science and technology. Build on KAUST. You have a tremendous opportunity there, and you have the resources to invest in being a leader in knowledge creation and the new businesses of the future. So I would invest in your science and technology infrastructure and all the people that go with that. And that starts, of course, at the earliest years of life.
Hans-Paul?
I would clearly echo that. I think investing in people, investing in their education and training, but it's not just, you know, engineers and scientists. We also need electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and so forth. And that's why I'm sure we'll talk about vocational training at some stage. We need to make sure that it's not just schools, but it's also the corporations are involved in the vocational training, that everybody at the different level of talent really gets a good base for his or her future, and really mobilizing all talent. The male and the female talent is really critical in order to really mobilize the whole society.
And Philip Yeo and also Dong Sung Cho, I hope you will answer that as well in your time coming up. I should underscore as well that we are discussing the role of women just after lunch and the important resource that there is there, which Deborah mentioned. That's going to be an open discussion next door just after lunch. Let's go to Professor Dong Sung Cho now from the Seoul National University. Your views as a professor of strategy and management design and sustainability management about what the challenges are in what we've heard from the Minister is now an unforgiving environment. Countries which decide to rest on their laurels will find themselves falling behind.
Right. Now, since you have introduced me as a strategist specialist, I will start with the strategy. Well, as we all know,
wrong slide.
that there are two kinds of strategy for corporations.
Do we have the right slides? Are they
Yeah, you're wrong slide.
It's not.
They're the wrong slides. I think they're Singapore rather than...
Yeah, okay, got it. Try again.
Try your handset.
The right one?
Can someone help? Hey, wrong slide again.
Oops, it's yours.
Well, I tell you what,
try.
shall we go to Philip first?
All right.
Yes.
If you don't mind.
I'll go ahead.
Why don't you go ahead with the slides,
Okay.
as they have jumped the queue and are
Okay.
giving you the opportunity now.
You have to press again. You have to press.
I have the press.
There's competition in slides here.
Okay.
Right, let's put the slides up, please.
Is it working? No? Can you press? Anyway.
Good idea.
Who's in charge of this PowerPoint?
Could someone explain what is happening with the slides, please?
Okay, click up the slides. I have only 5 slides. I thought I'd give some key points.
Now we have it.
Okay. Nope, it's not working.
That's mine.
That is yours now.
Right.
Right,
I start.
Got it. Go ahead.
that's open, innovative competition, which is unforgiving.
All right.
Professor, we're back to you. There is your slides.
Yeah,
You have 4
got it.
minutes, though.
Right. Well, thank you. Well, as we all know that there are two kinds of generic strategies for corporations to choose. One is low-cost or cost-based strategy. The other is differentiation. I believe a country, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, also has these two choices of strategies, either cost strategy or differentiation strategy, in its effort to enhance its competitiveness. Then what is the difference? I believe that there are more or less 8 factors that enhance competitiveness of any nations, 4 factors that are related with physical elements like factor conditions, business context, related and supporting industries, and demand conditions. And then there are 4 human factors, such as workers, political leaders and bureaucrats, entrepreneurs, and professionals. The cost strategy is based on the choice of factors on factor conditions of workers more, while differentiation strategy is based on demand conditions and professionals, and possibly entrepreneurs and related industries. In Korea, there is an institute called Industrial Policy Studies, and that has examined relative competitiveness of these about 60-some countries. But this institute has reported rankings in 2 scales. One is if all the countries in the world is using cost-based strategy, and the other is if all the countries are using differentiation strategies. If all the countries are using cost strategies, Saudi Arabia is placed number 24. On the other hand, if the countries are using differentiation, then Saudi Arabia comes number 34. What that means is, at the moment, Saudi Arabia is better off with comparative strategy on cost basis. That is the current standing. However, if this strategic base should be kept in the future, that is what I'm questioning. And let's see, what that shows is, among the 8 factors for physical and for human, Saudi Arabia is relatively strong with factor conditions, but not much with physical business context related industries or demand conditions. And indeed, on human factors, Saudi Arabia is best with political leaders and bureaucrats with number 25, while workers, entrepreneurs, and professionals, they're relatively weak. And what that leads to is, well, there are 3 major strategic directions that Saudi Arabia may choose. One is that Saudi Arabia should adopt differentiation strategy rather than low-cost strategy, because although strategy specialists argue that there are 2 strategies that are comparable, I don't believe so. Well, when the company is at a sort of less competitive strategy, or if the country is at a lower level, low-cost strategy may be a viable alternative. But when a country advances, differentiation is the only choice. So I believe Saudi Arabia has come to a stage where all the configuration of its economic strength should focus on differentiation rather than cost. Second, Saudi Arabia is now in a stage to be less dependent on crude oil and others, and more dependent on business context and on human factors, entrepreneurs and professionals. And in that context, I fully agree with the importance of education of the people in Saudi Arabia. And finally, I believe that Saudi Arabia should focus more on the growth of private sector that will enhance more employment of more Saudi Arabian nationals. Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you. Deborah, Hans-Paul, do you want to pick up at all on any of those points about a differentiation strategy, differentiation versus cost, and what he was saying there about the realities, and particularly about the private sector, quickly?
Well, yes, we heard some more C's, cost and commodity. And I would say that the differentiation strategy is absolutely critical. And of course, that's where the innovation comes in and the entrepreneurship and thinking and conceiving in ways that will add value. So it absolutely has to be something at the top of the list. Having said that, you have a great base to build on because of the assets here and the competitiveness of the current industries. Another C, current.
How many C's will we end up with?
I'll have a lot by the end of our...
Okay. Maybe you could just list them so I can come back to you and say these are the 10, 12. All right, Hans-Paul, do you want to just...
Well, I think almost every country starts with a cost strategy and then moves on to a more differentiated strategy. But I think the key element is that many efforts have to be made in parallel. And that's why I think so much entrepreneurship is needed also in other areas, whether it's software, whether it's hardware and technology. And I think the real danger is resting on the laurels of cheap energy resources. I think that would be really the key problem and the key danger for a country like Saudi Arabia.
Thank you. Minister, let me just put one point to you which picks up on what the professor just said. This on Twitter from OM Niger: a lack of access to correct data and information in KSA is a real hurdle to many investors. What steps are being taken to address this? Do you recognize this as a challenge for those who are working out whether they should be looking at Saudi Arabia as a competitive investment climate? The problem of data and stats.
You said data?
Data, yes, data.
Data and
Transparency.
statistics, yes.
Yes, I think it's a very important shortcoming, but I can assure you that we have been working very hard on this in terms of the timeliness.
You recognize it then?
We recognize that, and that's why, for example, last year was the first time that Saudi Arabia publishes quarterly data of GDP, for example. It wasn't for a long time. We didn't have that. Now we have it. We have revised a lot of our data. Those of you who are interested also, we have what we call the economic census, which is really a census of all the business establishments in Saudi Arabia with all of the relevant information, and they are published. Now, if you go to the website of the Central Department of Statistics and Information or the Ministry of Economy and Planning, you will find a lot of data, and I invite you to really do that because some people have given up on us. Please come back. We are really doing a lot and recognizing that we still have a long way to go, but we're working hard on it.
Deborah, are you finding this with your Council on Competitiveness, that the challenge still of getting good data everywhere or not?
Absolutely, and in fact, this afternoon at the GCF, those of you who participate in the session on decoding competitiveness are going to see for the first time a very new interactive model that's using data from very concrete, hard sources, UN statistical data and others, to really bring to life and delve deeply into competitiveness, as opposed to survey data, which is very, in my view, ephemeral. So constant data and deep data is critical, and I think, again, echoing what the minister said, it's very important for the kingdom to really get hold of that.
Philip, let's move on with your thoughts, please. Chairman of Standards, Productivity and Innovation for Growth, Spring in Singapore.
Well, I think what we do is that we have a monthly review of inputs of companies. Are they growing? And why are they not growing? And we pay attention to that to try to help them upgrade. And the key in upgrading is innovation, developing new ideas, new products. They don't have the new inventions, but basically improvements that can meet the market requirement. Okay? Okay. I have only 5 slides. I thought the key to competitiveness is basically diversification. It's important to diversify the economy. And what we have done since we started as purely a trading into diversify, and key, as in Saudi Arabia, is manufacturing. Manufacturing is high value and has a multiplier effect. What we have done over the last 50 years, we are 50 years old next year, is every 10 years we move up the ladder. Today we are in the knowledge-based economy phase. And in each of these phases, you notice below, there are infrastructure. You need infrastructure to support those phases of growth. And in this knowledge-based economy, we build infrastructure, we build what I call a knowledge-based technology park. What we have done is 2 key focus. One is the medical sciences. We have built 350,000 square meters of 13 labs for each of different sciences, genomics, neuroscience, biotechnology, immunology, and each of these research labs will house all these 7 buildings, about 3,000 scientists. The physical sciences are very important, as in Saudi Arabia, engineering. There we are building 4 million square feet or 400,000 square meters of spaces for all the. What you notice down there is a funny looking building at the bottom, which was just opened on Tuesday by Lucas, which is animation, what they call a sand crawler, if anybody can see that picture. So these are physical infrastructure you need to build a knowledge-based economy. But the most important in a knowledge-based economy is people. So from 2002 to today, we have sent out 1,200 young people to do bachelor to PhDs, and the majority of our young PhDs are girls. So for us to grow and for Saudi Arabia to grow, is to use your human capital to the maximum advantage. Thank you.
Philip, let me pick up there on an issue which is quite difficult here at the moment and in many other countries, the issue of labour. Because Singapore is going through a testing time, working out what kind of labor force in a country of almost 6 million you really want. You can import labor, you can give them visas, you can also say we don't want them.
Yeah.
What is your assessment when it comes to maintaining a competitive edge? Because politically, particularly with the recent problems with the Indian community at one point, this has now become quite a delicate issue in Singapore and is therefore affecting the impression and the image of your country.
Well, I think in some sense, Singapore is quite similar in Saudi Arabia. We have 3.5 million Singaporeans, 1.5 million foreign workers, so quite high proportion. Among the foreign workers, there are two categories, what they call the professional classification and the non-professional. For the professional classification, we are engineers, scientists, we give them green card status, permanent resident, and we have no difficulty. And those add to the economy. The difficulty is the non-professional, where we need the people for construction, for some of the labor, domestic services. And there we have a concern because we have been taking too many in the last 10 years because the economy has been growing double digit. And now the government realized there is social and important implications. So for the non-skilled professional, the government tightened up to reduce the dependence. On the balance, we think we want to keep about maybe no more than 20%, 30% of foreign workers in the lower economy.
What about the qualifications for being allowed into Singapore in terms of skills? Because I want to open up the discussion into the issue of skills. There are a lot of questions here about that. Skills and the next generation as well. Whether you grow it indigenously or you bring it in.
Well, we have very strong vocational training, vocational school, polytechnics, and universities. So we try to focus maybe about 40% of our population of vocational and polytechnic training so that we can replace the skilled jobs. But in the non-skilled jobs, like domestic maids, retail services, it's very hard to find, to depend on our own local population. So we have to try to divide the skills into those that we can train and those we may have to import.
Deborah, what's your view on this? And I just quote to you one point here from one message which I've got about from Faida Al-Hajj, I think I pronounced that correctly. To what extent can we consider the high percentage of youth in the Saudi population as a competitive advantage, given that there are other pressures here in the kingdom?
I think it's a huge competitive advantage. And, you know, we also see it as a competitive advantage in the United States. We're the only developed nation that has a growing population, even though we do have demographics and aging. And of course, in countries like Japan and Korea and others, particularly Japan, the aging issue is huge, and it is in China as well. So the youth here is an asset that really has the potential to be now molded and unleashed to do all this transformation and change. So I think it's a huge competitive advantage. Right now, it's a little bit of a challenge because of the job issue, the connection between, you know, the opportunities for jobs and the ability for the country to move forward. And that's where entrepreneurship comes in. And, you know, creating the conditions so that a very dynamic, youthful population really has the opportunity to grow and take the risks, which young people tend to do more than some of us who are a little bit older in our lives. So I think it's a great advantage.
But I keep pressing this because it's not unique to Saudi Arabia, of course. Look at Africa. Look at so many nations at the moment. This demographic bulge and the hangover that there is. And I'll come to you in a moment, Minister, Professor and Deborah and Paul. What are your views on this? Because this is something that's clearly coming through from the thoughts in people's minds. Hans Paul. Oh, no, Professor, please.
Yes, I have a very strong view on the importance of young people. I fully agree with Deborah. But at the same time, competitiveness does not come when people compete in their domestic market. Competitiveness in the world comes when a nation competes in the global world. So in that context, I believe that the government of the kingdom should strongly urge Saudi Arabian young people to go abroad and find education, jobs, and other opportunities, including social service and so on. And only then, when these young people in Saudi Arabia get all the perspectives of the world, and then I believe that they can connect their competitiveness with the Saudi Arabian competitiveness and truly make the kingdom competitive in the world.
But when you look at every other country which is wrestling with this problem of skills in the next generation, is there a clear message which is coming through on competition or not?
Can I actually disagree with you, Professor Cho? Because I think Saudi Arabia actually does send literally hundreds of thousands of young people to study abroad. Still, we have a very large number of young people here in Saudi Arabia, and not only in Saudi Arabia, not gainfully employed, and it's a ticking time bomb. Yes, of course, there could be a huge benefit from the young people, but if they don't have a chance to really engage, they will create unrest, and that's what we have seen in other North African and Middle Eastern countries and around the world. And so I think one of the key elements is not only ask for governments and countries to be competitive, but really to give people a chance to invest in themselves, to invest in companies, entrepreneurship. Deborah has mentioned that. And I think this will be the key part. I mean, the competitiveness of countries is the sum of the competitiveness of individuals and companies, and not something that can be just superimposed. You need to give people not only the chance, but also a sense of duty, as I said earlier, to really make a living for themselves. And therefore to provide the opportunities. The framework is important, but then, every one of you and your children have the right and the duty to really make it work. And if we make it too easy for them, if we always say, the government should do this or the government should do that, I think we give them a false sense of security.
Professor.
Yes, I believe that, well, I partially agree, but I believe there is another dimension of competitiveness. One dimension is static view of competitiveness, the other view is dynamic. I believe the static level of competitiveness comes from some or combination of people, industry, and so on. But let's think of the flow or the direction. I believe that this direction comes from the spirit of the people and the country. I believe when the people and the country as a whole have a spirit to go global and compete in the whole global market, the country can truly become global, as has been experienced in 2,500 years ago in Macedonia, 2,000 years ago in Roma, and 500 years in Spain, Portugal, England, and nowadays Americans. I believe that Saudi Arabia has every right and every opportunity to go abroad and become truly global as any other nations.
But aren't there more people coming into the US to compete and to build businesses in Silicon Valley, the Chinese, the Indians, the Koreans, and so forth, rather than Americans going out? So I think in America's competitiveness comes a lot from people coming in.
Minister,
well,
Deborah.
I have to jump in on that because, we've had a controversy and an opportunity for a long time is that when so many young people are educated in the United States, the moment they get their degrees, we send them back because of our antiquated visa policy, and we have a lot of effort to actually create the opportunity for young people, wherever they're from, to stay if they want in the United States and return. Now, having said that, we're focused at the U.S. Council on our capacity of our own citizens. We have demographics, a growing Hispanic population, minority population. They have to be educated, they have to be able to function, or we're going to have the conflict that was mentioned. And the issue of moving around the world, that's true, but remember, that's a small percentage of these sort of global nomads that are moving. You have to have a capacity in your country for people to grow up and have jobs, or over time you won't attract the high-value investment for high-value work because it depends on people.
Someone here was clapping very loudly. Who was it? I wonder if your table. Could I just get the microphone over? If there is a microphone somewhere, please, and just come here. Minister, could I ask for your reaction, because Saudi Arabia is wrestling with this issue at the moment. You've got a policy of deportation at the moment of a lot of workers, but on the other hand, you're being told, quite understandably, that you've got to somehow generate a new capacity in the next generation here. Help us understand, those foreigners particularly, understand where you think this is going, given the imperative to take advantage of this human capacity.
I just want to agree that the demographics are very, very important in Saudi Arabia, and we're going through very significant demographic transformation. I'll give you, especially for those that are on tweeting, They will like this. The Minister of Health just sent me the information, the latest statistics, and the life expectancy of a Saudi has reached 75 years as of 2013. In the early 70s, it was only 53. 53 years. 2006, it reached 71 years. End of 2013 is estimated to be 75 years. That's life expectancy of a Saudi. So when you look at our population demographics, clearly the working age people and the youth below that, below 15 years of age, is the largest portion of the population. So the challenge is, are we ready to provide the necessary jobs? I would like to remind ourselves that we have probably north of 8 million expatriates working amongst us. And thank you very much. They have helped and they continue to help in the building of this nation. What happened recently is not, I don't like the word deportation, I think it's normalization. Those who were illegal or those who lost their legal status, they're being asked to normalize and regularize their situation. But the point, the more significant point is that this economy is producing a lot of jobs. A lot of jobs. The question is, how do we ensure that we have the right matching between the skills produced in our universities and vocational training centers and the jobs of our growing and competitive economy? And if you don't mind, I would like to throw in another statistic. A lot of people here have talked, and I saw some of the tweets about diversification. Yes, if you take the definition of diversification, meaning the diversification of government revenues, yes, oil still dominates. But our non-oil exports, just remove oil from our exports, our non-oil exports have grown from only 32 billion riyals in 2001, 12 years ago, only 32 billion, and they have risen to 200 billion, from 32 to 200 billion riyals. That is a sign of competitive, and we're competing with the rest of the world. We are exporting and competing with the industrial countries.
Thank you. We have about 15 minutes to run. I just give you the opportunity. You were very enthusiastic with one comment from the platform, please.
This is Omar Najjar. I like the comment about the dynamic competitiveness, looking into the issue as a dynamic movement. And I think we are sometimes prisoned to our local problems, and we think about ourselves in the kingdom as just one entity that is separated from the rest of the world, which is probably not the right way of looking into our problems. Sometimes we just need to look at it as the problem as a dynamic issue, and the spirit of really moving forward and integrate with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Let me pick up that point. A prisoner, I hope you're able to hear it, a prisoner of our own problems. When you look at competition across the world, and wherever you've studied it and whatever you're looking at with the metrics, how does Saudi Arabia overcome this kind of sense from this intervention of being a prisoner of its own problems on this?
Well, that's a hard question, but it's at the heart of the matter, because I could say the same thing about the United States. We're a prisoner of some of our policies that are no longer competitive. You know, we have highest corporate tax rate. We have a regulatory system now that's strangling small businesses. We have a deficit that's unsustainable, entitlements. We've got a whole slew of things. We need to get our own house in order, because we can control some of those things. The things we can't control, where we need to collaborate and work together, and I think this is a tremendous leadership role that the Kingdom has showed, is to expand global trade. I mean, I think the fact that the Kingdom is a real presence now in the international economic policy body organizations is very, very significant, because expanding trade requires, you know, the rules of the game, transparency, openness. There's very good, I've been told there's very good intellectual property protection here. Another very important advantage for investment in things. So what I think, you know, we're trying to do, and maybe it's a model relevant here, is look at what you can change inside yourselves in your own country, and then what depends on your collaboration and partnerships. Because remember, the theme of this is partnership, and there are a lot of things you can do yourselves, but it takes some conflict, it takes a consensus, and then it takes a compact, and that takes a little bit of time, and it's hard.
And just picking up on what the Minister said, a question here from Tim Emmett about creating the new capacity in the next generation. What does the Saudi school system need to do to encourage competitiveness? How can the private sector be an effective partner in this? Hans-Paul.
Well, you know, I think just one thing on the prisoner. I think every time things are going reasonably well, we become prisoners of our success. That's for individuals, that's for companies, that's for countries. And I think that's why, yes, competition is dynamic and we need to reinvent ourselves, but it's easier said than done when there are no pressures. I mean, I think, you know, we've seen countries in the past, and the minister referred to Mr. Schröder in Germany. I think when things are really bad, then people are starting to change. Beforehand, they don't change. I think going back to the education system, I think we have an education crisis, so to speak, across the whole world. Every system, not just here in Saudi, every country, people are complaining that things are not making good progress. In Germany, you have the discussion, even though everybody praises the German vocational system. In the US, they complain about, you know, big challenges everywhere in the world. And I think the key is to make sure that really we do invest in people, but also make sure that they understand it's an investment in themselves. It's not just a right to have an education, but it's also an important investment where they really have to participate. And then also to give people a chance to try out different things, rather than to say we put you in boxes early on and tell you exactly what to do and then everything will be fine. I think that will be the big challenge, and we see this in you know, emerging markets. In India also we have a big challenge with education. Just because they seem to churn out hundreds of thousands of engineers doesn't mean that the system really works. It doesn't work on the elementary level. It works in some parts of the university system. But I think the key part is to really make sure that people have a chance to access good education, and the government sector and the private sector both play a very important role in order to up the quality overall of education and give people a chance to invest in themselves.
Right, we've got a... Philip.
I think the key in every country is that when you succeed, complacency is a challenge. Now, Singapore has the same problem. Our young people today are comfortable. So now in our universities, which is about 30% of our young people's population, we bring in foreign students, bright foreign students, give them free education up to 20% of the population, so they force the Singapore students to wake up, to compete. And when these students graduate, we employ them in Singapore. So the key for any young country, any country that is successful, is keep your people hungry.
Now, what's coming through from a number of questions is how open a playing field this is, and from your own experiences. Here, for example, a question actually from the Ministry of Labour, from Adel Fakir, on an email. What can the government do about increasing transparency and information sharing? Will this drive competitiveness? I mean, that's essentially confirming that there is a lack of transparency and information sharing. When it comes to the opportunities for competition, how vital is it that that is fixed? Professor.
Well, transparency is very important, but I believe that there has to be one element before transparency. That is accountability. We have to make sure that any effort by the government or private sector should be fully accountable, and then based on that, transparency will make sense. And I believe that this accountability and transparency form social capital, and I believe that every country needs this, and including the kingdom.
Deborah.
I would add to the professor's remarks, which I think were great, the word trust. I think that the public sector, because it is the public sector, has a huge issue of trust and confidence and accountability. And you have to have the information that's available in order to sustain that. And, you know, around the world, wherever we see now, because, of course, with the communication, instant communication, all of this, where there is a faltering of trust and accountability, bad things happen. I'll just share one example. I spent 6 years serving on the Board of Oversight of the Internal Revenue Service in the United States. We had an incident that was lack of trust, lack of information. It was a bad thing that occurred way down in this huge organization, the world's largest financial institution, and it's had huge repercussions in the American people not trusting their government with their private information. So trust is at the core of what our public-private partnership has to be about. And then also, the private sector has to be trusted, and that's true with human beings.
Information and transparency, Hans-Paul. How much, if that isn't addressed, does that hold back competitiveness?
Well, I think we're living in an age of increasing transparency. Very few things can be kept secret, as we know, and almost everything is open. So I'm not sure whether transparency is the issue. I think Deborah put the right thing on it. Is it trust? Do people really believe that based on what they know, I think they can really participate? And are the systems open to allow people to really play, whether it's in education, whether it's really building business, whether it's competing for jobs, and are we really sure that the better is beating the good, or are the better being better compensated, or do we create a system where everybody gets about the same in the word of the principle of fairness? So I think it's less, the information is there. I think we have access to more and more information. And the issue is, will that really lead to more trust, or will it undermine trust? Because we see a lot of friction and discrepancies, and we'll see more and more of that as we have more and more transparency. So I think what we see is we're going through a very difficult time where the increased information transparency will lead to less trust and more friction in society, and we need to address that. And you cannot, throw more data in it. What you do have to do is to change behavior slowly, and the minister, I think, has mentioned that it takes quite a lot of patient efforts to really change institutions and the behavior of people.
Thank you. We're in the last couple of minutes, Minister, so let me put it to you. Do you concede that this is actually a very difficult problem, information transparency and sharing of information? Otherwise, competition is going to be held back.
I can't agree more. I mean, transparency is like, as they say, motherhood and apple pie. Nobody will disagree with that. I think we recognize that, and if you see what happened over the last couple of years, you will see that we have moved significantly forward. The challenges continue to be there. But also, I would like to add, if you don't mind, somebody mentioned, what does the business community do? 2 weeks ago, the Chamber of Commerce, the Minister of Trade and Industry, have celebrated the award of 30 awards to young Saudi men and women entrepreneurs for their projects, for their creative projects. What we need now, I mean, we have 185,000 Saudi students going overseas. We have 1 million Saudi students in our colleges here. So we have a lot of young people that are trying to get that diversified experience. But also we need to fire up the entrepreneurial spirit. And business people here, I call upon them. I see the chairman of the of the Riyadh Chamber of Commerce. We need the business people to fire up that entrepreneurial spirit among the young people, because you cannot have a market economy without a large number of young entrepreneurs.
All right, before I ask Deborah for how many C's she's now accumulated in the last hour, Minister, one particular question here then, building on exactly that point from Abu Ghazali. Fear is a great motivator. What is your biggest fear for Saudi competitiveness over the coming years? What are you going to do to address it?
I think I answered that in my speech: complacency. If we just say, look, our budget deficit is only 2.7% of our GDP, we have large reserves, we are an oasis of stability in a neighborhood that is fraught with problems, so we shouldn't change. No. We have to keep moving forward, and we can and we will, inshallah.
Deborah, any other C's to add since your first list?
We've talked about the continuous journey. We've talked about how to catalyze new generations of partnerships, catalyze entrepreneurships. We've talked about the difficulty of constructing new models, another C. I think certifying what's true and what's not in transparency. I think the idea of the coalitions that have to be brought together for change is a very important concept here, using this letter C, and that everybody's going to contribute, and at the end of the day, it is about contributing, because human beings want to contribute and they want to do something that adds value. And culture is also very, very important, and we all have distinct, different cultures, and we need to build on that as a strength, not a weakness.
Thank you very much indeed. We've really set the ball rolling here, including from the Minister, saying beware of complacency, and time is a real challenge for you. We've set the ball rolling. We've helped create a framework for these 2 days of discussions, which is going to underpin many other more specific discussions. But Minister, panelists, thank you very much indeed. I have a service message for you, which is that coffee is going to be even shorter than you expected. So if you're able to disappear from here, get your coffee and return with it maybe, and I'm told in 10 minutes, but that's quite a tall order. But please, we're running about 20 minutes late. It'd be great if you could. But panelists and Minister, thank you very much indeed.